A good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bintel Powell, CEO and founder of Bandit Publishing again. And I wanted to take this time in this presentation to discuss the book, The Formula, explain why I wrote it. And I mean, all of this has started from writing books. I wrote two books in my lifetime. The first book is titled Betrayed. That was my freshman effort. It was about autobiographical and about the issue of light and dark skin in the black community, a devastating phenomena that stems back to a slave consultant that was brought to the United States from the Caribbean to teach the slave owners how to get black slaves under control and work for free. His name was Willie Lynch, and he's the one who instituted this hierarchy of value in the black community that devastates the black community even today. And my sophomore effort is The Formula, also autobiographical, which is more about the side of my engineering side, and the two are connected in a very real way. Betrayed is the formula, me discovering the formula in my corporate life. It looks like people think it's a ghetto book or it's about me as a drug dealer, but I'm wearing a suit, and it's the New York City skyline. So I'm not sure. And the young lady on the cover is now a very famous actress. Her name is Sky P. Marshall. I remember seeing her in clubs in Manhattan and just being so proud of her and thinking that she was, a beautiful representation of a chocolate woman. And I chased her down and begged her to be on the cover, and she was kind enough to do that for me. But the two are connected. But for the sake of this presentation, I really just want to discuss the formula. I want to talk about what's in it, why it's important, why all children, black children, specifically black and Spanish children, need to listen to this audiobook or read the book, why it should be in the schools, and how I believe it can help to turn the economic and social crisis in our communities around for the better. So I'm saying that there's a technological conspiracy to withhold technological information from black and brown kids, poor people, white, black, or whatever. The top 1% is instructing the schools to do this. That is tantamount to economic murder. I really believe, not to be theatrical. All right, and that is to not tell people that the top of the technological food chain is inventing something called a disruptive innovation and a unicorn company. And I'm saying that engineers usually make those. I'm not saying that that's a fact. 99% of the time, engineers make disruptors. Disruptive innovations like Uber or Netflix turns the creator of the disruptor into a billionaire. And in one day, through a process called the IPO, which I talk about in other videos, and engineers usually make these things, right? And I'm saying that Northeastern purposefully gave me the tools to make a disruptor and a unicorn. Well, a disruptor, I learned to make a unicorn in sales. They gave me the tools and tested me on it, but purposefully didn't tell me that it was even a thing and didn't tell me how to use the tools that they gave me to make it, right? I'm saying that that's a conspiracy to turn everybody, to keep the masses of people from competing with the top technology companies. And I'm saying that I have the tools to teach everyone to do that and to compete at the highest level with Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, all right? This conspiracy is equivalent to all these kids out there playing sports in colleges and playing track and field, football, basketball, and then keeping it a secret from them that there's an NBA or an NFL draft. That, if you want to think about it in that terms, that is the equivalent of what is happening. Kids are playing sports and going after that tooth and nail with all their heart and soul because they see the pot of gold as the NFL draft when they become millionaires and billionaires and buy mama a house, right? In any sport. Why would you not tell people that are going into technology that the top of the food chain and the big payday is in creating a disruptor and becoming a billionaire? Why would you keep that a secret from poor people who come to your institution and pay you to teach their kids for a better future? Why would you not tell them that? Conspiracy. All right. So I'm saying, and the reason you should trust me is for two reasons. I am an engineer, for one, but that's not the biggest reason. The biggest reason that engineers and technicians have one skill, that give them the ability to see this kind of stuff. And it's called the ability to troubleshoot. Troubleshooting is you bring your toaster to the local guy in your neighborhood that fixes bikes and toasters and fridges, right? You have to go buy a new one, and he can troubleshoot it, test it. There's no voltage here, the light there, and he can figure out through process of elimination, which is called troubleshooting, that you have faulty compressor, and that's why your fridge is not working. Or there's a short in your wire at the bottom of your toaster. That's not what it's working. He changes it, give it back to you, and it works, all right? I'm saying that me, Bintel Powell, being a dark-skinned Jamaican male, coming to the United States of America, being born in Brooklyn and having Jamaican parents, and Jamaican people are incredibly color-struck. I'm saying that I have diagnosed the black community and the country of America, as racist as America is, and have come to the conclusion that this is our issue. The color, because the rule of the land in sales, and salespeople make more money than all other professionals on earth, is that success in business is almost 99.99999% about relationships. And if the black community has no relationships with itself because of this color issue, then it is a broken money machine. All right? And what I'm also saying is that this model that I've given you gives you the ability to engineer a money machine, whether you are a small business owner, a corporation, or even a nation. You can figure it out, you can diagnose it, you can troubleshoot it, and figure out where it's broken. And you can do this, and I have the ability to do this because I've been reared as a technician and an engineer my whole life. My father was a mechanic. I used to sit there and watch him fix cars in the garage, which I talk about in the book, right? So this is why you should at least trust me that I know what I'm talking, or that I might know what I'm talking about, because I have troubleshot the black community, the country, and being an engineer, working in corporates, being a sales engineer, and working with CEOs and designing computer systems for them. And this is what they're not telling our kids because they don't want competition. And I am here to level the playing field. So as I said before, we're just focusing on the formula for this presentation. We'll do Betrayed another time. And this is the cover of the formula. As I said, my mom was an artist, so I guess this is her inspiration, or my, her sensibility coming through me, even though she's not with us. She's with the ancestors. God bless her. But the thought process here with the cover is that I wanted people to look at this and feel personally empowered that they can get on this financial vehicle. And if you look, the engine for the financial vehicle are 3 Bunsen burners. So I was trying to say money machine, right, and formula visually at the same time, but I didn't want it to be color specific. So I purposefully put the person on this vehicle flying down Wall Street in a suit, right? And so you can't tell if it's a man. Well, you can tell it's a man, but you can't tell if he's black or white because I didn't want race to play a part in this. And I want to also say unequivocally that speed is an issue here. All right. So this money machine, and we're supercharging or turbocharging this money machine with this very simple formula that obviously only has 3 different chemicals. Right. So if you can figure out what these 3 chemicals are, you can supercharge your bicycle, your car, whatever, and fly down Wall Street. Like obviously I have 23 on the helmet, indicative of my favorite athlete of all times, Michael Jordan. So that's the artistic psychology behind the cover. That's what I'm trying to say. A picture tells 1,000 words. Well, that's a lot less than 1,000. All right, so the first chapter the title is What If, right? And that title, I just want to say, is going to be reminiscent of one of the most magical parts of the formula later on that you guys will hopefully get to and read, which is the how do you invent stuff part of being an engineer, right? I said before, engineers can diagnose a problem and then they can make something that fixes it. Well, that what if, which we'll talk about later, is a very big part of the invention and the magic of being an engineer. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. But the first chapter, in me thinking about it as I was designing the book, I was like, okay, people are going to be like, the formula, this is a scam, whatever, formula, money machine, yeah, right. So the first thing I wanted to do was establish, like when you come out as a boxer, you want to establish the jab. I wanted to establish that even though you don't think that formulas and models or formulas are a thing, you're actually already living with formulas and models right now. You just don't know it. You take them for granted. So I draw a parallel between models and formulas, right? And if you think about it, a formula, the first four letters of the word formula are form, which is indicative of a shape, which is indicative of a model. So what we're trying to say here in the first chapter, I just, get right at it. The first chapter, I talk about the different types of formulas, like different types of models. And I draw a parallel between models and formulas to the tune of eliminating risk, right? Because that's what this is. This is about a money machine. And that's why people are afraid to even start to try to even think that they could design their own money machine, because it's too much risk involved. There's too much risk for failure. They say something like 9 out of every 10 companies fail in the first 6 months, or some really scary. So that's a lot of risk. So the goal of the first chapter was just to say, hey, you are already using models and formulas, even though you think that this is a scam, this book is a scam. I'm here to show you right now that you use them already in your life every day. You just take them for granted. And when you combine a model and a formula, you protect yourself from the scariest part of making a money machine, risk. So that's what the first chapter is establishes with the reader. And when readers get that, they're like, oh, okay, this is not some sort of a get rich quick scam. This is actually legitimate, logical information. Now, in this second chapter, I really try to come out swinging, and I get into something that is, I actually heard Chris Rock say, the correlation throughout history of people profiting from pain, right? And this is a very big part of being a salesman. I talk about me being an engineer and a salesperson, and I blatantly say that money is basically a sort of like a keeping track of how much pain you provide the world, pain relief rather, that you provide the world. So I basically say that if you can engineer or come up with a product that cures pain, people will give you their money. Anytime people spend money, they're actually trying to cure some pain that they're in. And what pain is, we discuss later on. So the name of this chapter is Pain for Profit, and I go into and in the book, because I'm essentially a nobody, I have these quotes from other successful business people that are essentially saying the same thing that I'm saying, but saying it in a much more high level language, or they're saying it they're saying it through their own eyes and their own experiences. I learned this pain profit thing as a salesman working in corporate America. I was a sales engineer. That's where I got my start. I'm an electrical engineer, and I came out and I worked as a sales engineer. I was the guy who would sell the technology that companies like AT&T or Tesla or whoever, I was their hired technical gun. And they would train us on how to uncover a customer's pain and turn it into a profit for our company, and prove to them that our product will cure their pain. That's why they should buy it for a certain amount of money, right? So this is where I really get into that. And this is a language. This is a mentality. If you watch certain financial channels, you'll hear them talk about pain. As simple as it sounds, that's what it is. People spend money to cure pain. So this chapter really goes into that. And immediately when people read this chapter, they start thinking, okay, what can I do to cure people's pain so that they give me money? That's immediately what happens to people. Every person that's read this book has told me that as soon as they read this chapter, that's what they start thinking. Now, the problem is, if you're a school and you're dealing with kids, your kids, because of the media, have been convinced that their value in life is to inflict pain on each other, is to hurt each other. They don't realize that the people who they admire, the wealthy people, especially the rappers, they are consumed totally with curing pain for the world. But they don't tell you this. All right? I'm telling you this. And the rappers confuse your children because the rappers act like they're inflicting pain, but their music is actually curing pain. Right? Emotional pain. That's what music is designed to cure. So this is very confusing for children and even adults unless you make it plain and simple like this. And the only way, if you're a school, that you're going to get your kids to understand this is if they read a book like this that says it in plain English. Nobody else is saying this in plain English except for me. This chapter is critically important. So whether you're an adult or not, if you want to make money, you have to cure people's pain. The question is, what is pain? As simple as that sounds and as ridiculous as that question is, what is it? Because there are different types of pain and different products cure different pain. And if you don't know what they are, it's going to be very difficult for you to come up with a product to cure it because you don't even know they exist. Now the next chapter is fittingly called The Difference, and it is simply a very blatant critical thinking exercise. And it just basically says blatantly that the working class poor avoid pain at all costs. They run from it. And that running from or avoiding it and shying away from it leads them headlong into the products of the rich. Right? They're running from pain and like, oh my God, there's pain over there. They run from pain and then they're like, what can I do to protect myself from that pain? And the rich people say, hey, I got a product over here that'll help you cure that pain. And they're like, okay, how much is it? Give it to me. Right? And it's because they're constantly running from pain. Whereas the wealthy, they sit back like a cougar in the tree, just waiting, watching for your pain, loving it. Loving to see your pain. And once they see what you're in pain about, they turn their engineering cap on and they make something to cure that pain. They don't need to go to college to get an engineering degree. They have the audacity to do it whether they're an engineer or not. And that's the difference. A very simple critical thinking exercise like in Sesame Street, one of these kids are doing their own thing. It's very simple, and as the reader, whether you're an adult or a child, you're going to put yourself in one of those two buckets. You're going to say, am I the working class poor that runs from pain? Or am I the wealthy that embraces pain and comes up with an idea for a product to cure it? And once you figure out who you are, you're going to have to make a decision to do something about it. The rub is that the same thing that makes people successful holds them back from being successful because if it's painful to do what the latter and be wealthy. It's painful to sit there and watch and observe and be quiet enough to actually figure out what people are in pain about. And then on top of that, come up with an idea for a product. And then on top of that, try to explain it to your customer to get them to buy it. That's painful, time consuming, emotionally painful, right? So this chapter kind of, calls you to task and say, hey, who do you want to be? Okay, now before I forget, in the Pain is Profit chapter, I left this out, I allude to the fact that all companies are made of two parts, the part that engineers the product and the part that sells it. So that's where I introduce the notion of being this sales engineer, which is how I discovered this formula. And I also allude to the fact that it's ideal, or most successful people can do both. So they are most successful people as sales engineers, regardless if they're an engineer or not, no matter what industry they're in, can engineer a product and sell it, and they can almost become a company unto themselves. So that sort of starts to point the reader in the direction that I have to develop these two skill sets, and naturally, you're going to start looking at the successful people that you admire on the television screen, and you're going to say, wow, all the successful people who I admire, who I look up to, who are my role models, they can do that. They can create and sell. So I just want to make sure that I let you ladies and gentlemen know that that's where we enter. That's where the notion of the sales engineer is introduced in the storyline. And there are 9 acts in the book. The first 3 chapters are comprised of the first act, and then the second act, begins. The first chapter of the second act is Money Machines for Everyone, and this was where it gets sort of story-like. The first act is very factual and was trying to establish, the notion that there could actually be a formula and this could actually be real. And I hit people with facts, and again, we have these quotes from very famous entrepreneurs all throughout the book. But in the second act, we introduce Bintel as a boy growing up with these two parents from, these two Jamaican immigrants who come to the United States, who landed in Brooklyn, and Bintel is, listening. This little boy Bintel is listening to his parents argue daily about money, and as he's watching TV, trying to ignore their bickering, he sees a money machine on television, and he puts it in his mind that somebody has the instructions on how to make this money machine. And if he can figure out, or he can discover it, and he can find out who these people are and get the information from them, then he can make a money machine for his family, and his mom and dad will stop arguing, and it'll save his family from sure destruction, because in his childlike innocence and genius, he sees that as the inevitable. Unfortunately, that was the inevitable for him. But this is where the notion of a money machine is introduced in the book. And this is where it becomes a bit of a story. Not even a bit of a story, it becomes a story. Now in the hunt, in the second act, the little boy is running around. He's convinced that there are some people who have the answers to how to make this money machine. They're just keeping it a secret from him. And he starts to realize that all the people that are around him, all the adults around him that he thought would know, have no idea. In fact, they're just as lost about how to make a money machine as he is. They're just disguising it with their jobs, right? And he starts talking to his family, and they're giving him all these ridiculous questions about Jesus, and Jesus is going to give him money, and which may or may not be true, but he's getting like money is the root of all evil, and he's just getting all these conflicting messages about how to make a lot of money. And then he goes to the store. This is all a true story. He goes to the store, this local candy store in Uniondale where he grew up as a boy, and he asks the man who was behind the counter, who owned the grocery store, the little corner store where he would buy candy before he went to elementary school every day. And the man looks at him and says, "Listen, my son, if you want to make a lot of money, you have to be your own boss." And he takes that information and runs with it, because in his mind, that's the only information that he's ever gotten from an adult on how to make a money machine that has made any sense. And that information that this gray-haired, white-haired man, who in his mind he felt looked like Superman's father, gives him, puts him on the right path, and leads him later on in the book to become a sales engineer, because salespeople are essentially their own boss working inside another company. So now in this chapter, he's still searching, and he's going through his whole adolescence, and he's trying. Nobody's talking about money, and somehow he gets bamboozled, in his words, by his mother and father to go to school to become an engineer. And he's like, all right, well, those people make things, so I guess that has something to do with engineering, and has something to do with making money. So he agrees to it, and he goes to college, and nobody's talking about money in college. And he's like, what is this? This is the only reason I'm here. So he's just walking around frustrated and getting angrier by the minute, because he's like, when is someone going to start talking to me about how to make money? And even in college, nobody. And he talks to his mom about it, and she says, well, I guess they're going to tell you on your first job. She has no idea either. And he comes home from college, and he looks in the newspaper, and he finds out, to his surprise, that the engineers are not the highest paid at least in the newspaper. He finds out that the salespeople are the highest paid positions of all, and he slowly realizes that salespeople make more money than all other professionals combined. They're more likely to become the CEOs and owners of their own businesses, which is in line with what the gray-haired man that told him years ago with the white hair in the candy store. So he makes a beeline and says, forget about engineering, I'm going to be a salesperson. And this is where, in the next chapter, in the coming chapters, the birth of a salesman. He becomes a salesperson, and he finally gets the information on how to build his money machine as an engineer who is also a salesman. Now, on this job as a sales engineer, his eyes really get opened. This is where he comes to the revelation that a sales engineer is a company unto himself. And he starts to realize that some of the greatest inventors have the ability to be the greatest entrepreneurs, and CEOs have the ability to not only engineer a product and sell it. He starts to see nations as companies. He starts to see, so he starts making drawing a parallel between, he draws a parallel between a human being as a sales engineer, a company as a function of engineering and sales, as well as a nation. And it really, he gets this guy, Rich Chereskin, that he from Huntington, Long Island, Huntington. He goes into his office, and he's a young black man, so he's afraid he's not going to get a job, and he deals with incredible racism in the corporate world. But he runs into this Jewish man named Rich Chereskin, who has a picture of Michael Jordan above his desk when he walks in the office. And this guy, Rich Chereskin, gives him this money machine. Even though he's black, he becomes Rich Chereskin protects him when he's doing horribly, and basically allows him to grow as an executive. Helps him win a trip to Monte Carlo, where a little kid coming from Brooklyn to then win a trip to Monte Carlo as a sales engineer is just a huge thing for him. And as I said before, he starts to really put some things together and sees the sales engineering position as the birth of an economy. And he draws a parallel between a human being, like a celebrity as a sales engineer, like Jay-Z or Beyonce or 50 Cent or anybody, as well as being a sales engineer, just like a company like Apple or Tesla, full of sales engineers. Elon Musk being a sales engineer, Mark Zuckerberg being a sales engineer, to even a nation being a function of engineering and sales. And that's where this thing really explodes. And he starts to become the person that he's going to be. So he's flying around Manhattan as a sales engineer, making a lot of money and trying to keep up with his friends that go to Ivy League schools, and he's becoming pretty ostentatious, and he realizes that he has a duty to share what he's discovered, and he's finally got his hands on this money machine information. He wants to sort of show himself off. So he realizes that he has a duty to go back and tell the kids that grew up like him what he's now discovered. He realizes that he's got to let the cat out of the bag, because he knows all too well how many other kids like him have grown up, did not have the luxury of going to a private school, did not have a mother to force him to do the things that he's done, and he feels like he's not like a criminal, but he's grown up around some pretty rough characters. He's a fighter. He gets into a lot of fights, and he's got a bit of a split personality. One moment he can be in a barroom brawl, and the next moment he can be in an office explaining high level technology to a CEO. He can play both sides of the fence. So his heart is still in the community with poor people. And his wife is a teacher, and he gets the idea that the first people he wants to tell about this are the kids in the public schools that are going crazy because his wife is telling him all these nightmare stories. He knows about the Untouchables, a gang who he dealt with in his life in high school, which you'll hear about later on. He knows what those kids are capable of, how easy it is for them to go to jail. So he goes to the school with his wife and makes the kids a bet that he can teach them how to make a money machine if they would just give him a chance. And he bets them this Cartier watch that he purchases with his commissions that he's making, because he's hanging out in the Hamptons and he feels like he has to be part of that life. And he bets these kids
if he doesn't teach them how to make a money machine, that he's going to give that somebody in the class his Cartier watch because he wasted their time. And they take the bet. And he explains this to them in a way that is very simple, because as a sales engineer, that's what he does. That's his job. His job is to explain high-level technology to CEOs that have no idea what technology is in a very, very simple way in a very short amount of time. So he uses this talent that he's developed as a sales engineer to show these at-risk kids how to make a money machine. And he bets them, and he leaves with his watch, and it becomes a thing. He starts writing his wife's lesson plans, and he goes on a tear to try to test it everywhere he can. So he shows it to corporate people, he shows it to business people because they love it for the sales component. He shows it to the kids because all the kids want to be entrepreneurs. And no matter where he shows it to them, they all agree that it really is a money machine, and nobody can break it. And that's when he says he really has to, explain this to the world. And that's what has led me to you.
Okay, so the bet chapter ends, and we've talked about a money machine, the name of the 9 acts of the book, and we talked about money machine so much now that people are like, okay, how do you make this money machine? And this is where it just gets straight technical, like an engineering book. and we go into the different instruments of the formula, how they're used, and again, how other great entrepreneurs have used these instruments. Although they didn't identify them as the way I did, they've used these instruments to make, to become billionaires. And the reason why I believe I have a right to say this is that I'm a salesperson and an engineer. So someone like me, maybe not me per se, but someone like me is technically qualified on paper to create a company and then sell it all over the world. Salespeople sell the products, engineers make them. And this act is called, since I call it a money machine, when my parents used to buy me toys as a kid, they would always be assembly instructions included. That's the name of this act. The first act is Could It Be, right? Because I'm speaking to people's sentiment that this is malarkey. There's no such thing as a money machine. The second act is the money machine, and I'm searching for it in that act, and I find it finally as a sales engineer. And then the third act is assembly instructions included. And it gets very, basic. This is how you plug this into plug that, and you plug that into this, and this is how you use this. It goes in, and the 3 elements of the formula, which I'm not going to tell you what they are. And these are standard engineering tools, right? So in this book, basically, I'm inventing a genre of engineering, like biomedical engineering or electrical engineering, which is what I went to Northeastern and studied, chemical engineering, mechanical, physical, or computer science. These are all engineering genres. And what I've done here is created a genre of engineering where you're using traditional engineering instruments to engineer a company. So I always joke around and say, hey, after you read this book, it turns you into a money engineer. All right, so after the owner's manual act, it goes to another act. Let me make sure I'm looking at this. I'm sorry. There's so many acts. Sometimes it goes into the rat race, and the rat race is basically me going back, flashback, literary device to my childhood, where I'm a little boy, and we find in high school basically, and my parents moved from the South Shore of Long Island, New York, which is a very working class part of Long Island, New York, to the North Shore, which is where all the white-collar wealthy people live. And it talks about the difference between those two lifestyles, and it's a culture shock for me as a young man. And it talks about me, going to restaurants with my mom. She used to take us to restaurants and watching these wealthy people, listening to the way they spoke, and really being captivated by them and their relationships. And then when I went to college, finally going off to college and in search of this rat race, and my father, sort of chastising me, telling me that I'm not college material, which was pretty hurtful, but it at the end it became a motivator. And and it just talks about life in college and me finally getting a job at Canon USA as a sales engineer. Excuse my voice. I caught a little bit of a cold and my voice is crackling. So it has chapters like the laboratory, where I'm actually my first job, where Rich Tereskin gives me this money machine, and I call it a lab. And then the wake up call, how the copy, and this is specific to me being on the job and realizing, oh my God, they've already given me this money machine. And then, the liberation of the thought of having a universal formula, how it liberated me, because I'm a little kid from the South Shore of Long Island. I don't think I can do this. So I get bounced around, and this is where it gets very salesy. So if you're a sales manager out there, you want to motivate your new sales team, this chapter is all about sales. So when I sell it to car dealerships and banks, this is the chapter that really, and this is the act, that really legitimizes it as a sale. And that's how I got caught up in books, right? I was working as a sales engineer. My manager would come in and say, hey, you have to read this book or else you're fired. And I'd be like, okay, I guess I'm reading the book. So this is my homage to being in sales, and it really goes into the mechanics of sales. And if you're going to go into sales, what you can expect to deal with, especially if you're going to be a sales engineer like me. And then Act 5 is called Human Currency. And it's another one of the acts that I think is very important for young people to read as a summer reading. What I found out when I was working in corporate is that people were always talking about passion, talent, and genius. And in my mind, the word passion for a man seemed pretty feminine. And that's not what I wanted to be, because I was trying to impress the lady folks. So I said I didn't want to be passionate, but I did want to be talented, and I didn't know what a genius was. And so I go through this entire act constantly hearing this passion, talent, and genius. And it even takes me back to a trip that my parents took me on to Paris in 6th grade, and how my aunt kept talking about this kid who was playing the guitar, who was so passionate and talented and a genius. And it was just how my mother scowled at me because I wouldn't play my guitar because I hated it. And then I finally, it finally come to the realization that leading business people and billionaire successful corporate rock stars consider passion, talent, and genius human currency. Human currency. Those three things are called human currency, because they believe that wherever your passion and talent and genius is, if you know what that is, money is soon to follow. So young people definitely need to know what their passion, talent, and genius is in junior high school. And they need to develop it. And it talks about how you can grow your talent and your passion and your genius, and how those three things play into developing your money machine. And this chapter also goes into me as a guitar player and playing my guitar and realizing that the thought process of playing music and improvising as a jazz guitarist, because I idolized Miles Davis and jazz music. I went to Northeastern, and Berklee School of Music was around the corner. I'd studied with Miles Davis and Charlie Parker's rhythm guitar player. His name was Billy Bauer. And I talked about the thought process of innovating as a soloist in a jazz setting that was very similar to innovating as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, and coming up with what's called a disruptive innovation using the tools that I showed you in Act 3, Owner's Manual. So for young people that are for a summer reading, for those reasons alone, I see it as a must-have. And there are other chapters where I go into stories about a friend of mine who went to Ivy League school. He went to Harvard and Yale, and he pledged Kappa. It's a true story. His name is Mark Prasad, and he was an older brother to all of us. And I met him when I moved to the North Shore. His father was a psychologist, and I talk about the Untouchables, this gang that beat me up because I had this plan to become popular, because that's all I ever wanted to be, was have friends, because we were moving all over the place so much. So there's a chapter in there where I go into just studying Mark, and Mark going off to Harvard and Yale, pledging Kappa, and Quincy Jones calling Mark to run his record label. And because Mark became such a celebrity all of a sudden, and we were his little brothers, because he had two other twin brothers, and we used to stay at their house, and one of them went to Boston University while I went to NU, so we're still close to this day. I got a chance to live in the world of engineering during the day and black celebrity, A-list celebrity a VIP life in Manhattan at night. So by day I was the sales engineer, and at night I was hanging out with these celebrities and watching what they were doing. Just the same way I was watching as I moved to the North Shore, I started to see the framework of this money machine that Rich Chereskin had given me on my first job. Excuse me. So these chapters are very important, and we talk about the difference between what there's a chapter called Gangrene where we talk about Mark Prasad becoming a Kappa in his gang, and how he came back from Harvard and would lecture me in the summer and talk to me about relationships and stuff, which I was using. And I was in high school then, so I didn't understand, but I flashed back to him lecturing me. And Mark became a very famous guy, His brothers became very powerful. They were all over TV. I was hanging out with Larry Fishburne. So it was very overwhelming for me working as a sales engineer during the day and hanging out with celebrities. I mean, I hung out with everybody. I spent every dime I had buying fancy clothes, and I remember I got in trouble. I mean, there's so many chapters in there that are really important for young people. Getting arrested, and because I had a Rolex on, they let me out, and that's when I realized the power of image and status symbols, and I started buying expensive clothes and Range Rovers and watches to encapsulate myself in this image of wealth and how I use it to manipulate society during the day and at night. And I talk about the difference between the gangs, the Untouchables that I'd grown up with, fighting with those guys when I came to the North Shore, and the gangs that Mark was involved with, the corporate gangs, and how they were similar and different at the same time, and which ones, how the Untouchables were looking for local power, how Mark was looking for international dominance as a CEO, and he was obsessed with making companies, while the Untouchables, they were just happy getting a job. So I talk about that, and I talk about the differences, and there's, for all those kids out there that are in gangs that don't understand that there's something better, that there's a better gang that's with less risk for bodily and harm, and all those kids that are getting murdered and shot out there. I wrote this true story for them, so that they can see that they have a choice, they have an option. They can join a gang, but they can join a gang that's a lot safer for them, and for the long term, and a lot more profitable. Okay, so these are some of the reasons. And the human currency thing, that's huge. The gang thing, that's huge. For adults and kids, and then understanding how to build this money machine, and just this whole revelation of the difference in lifestyle and choices between the North Shore and the South Shore. There's a chapter in there called the Time Machine, where we talk about time management and the money machine being a function of time, so that time management is a thing. It's a very big thing. So we can introduce time management to junior high school kids. That's a monstrous thing. So these are some of the things in these acts that I want to point out, that I believe are critically important as a summer reading, or as a reading just during the day, that on top of that, we're giving you a brand of engineering. So it straddles the notion of being very technical at one point, and then being very emotionally intelligent, and developing the skills to build relationships. And we all know in success, salespeople will tell you, success in the business world is almost 100% about relationships. Now, here are a list of the individual chapters, and I'm hoping the titles will give you a hint as to what's in the book. And I just want to say, and trying to wrap up here because we're really breaking the laws of these videos, it's going on 43 minutes. I'm in the schools, and as I was when I was in high school, the kids are wild. They have zero faith that the schools can teach them how to make money. They are focused in on becoming rappers, athletes, drug dealers, gangsters, and for the girls, strippers. They're twerking on Instagram. The only good thing is that they all want to be entrepreneurs. And that's what this is, Entrepreneurship 101. And I can tell you from experience, being an at-risk kid, and the only reason I'm not dead is because my mother sent me away to some school in Boston, or in jail, is that I remember being in school and just seeing the first black man that I'd ever seen with a college degree, and how that shocked me, and just being shocked by the change in the environment. And then I read Malcolm X's autobiography. And I'd read a lot of books my mother made me read all of James Baldwin books when I grew up, and I read all these books about dogs because I was in chat. I was just enthralled with dogs and how fearless they were and loyal and loving they were. And Malcolm X's autobiography stopped me in my tracks. And when kids go to, when young black men who unfortunately go to jail at higher rates than anyone else, when they go to jail, they become bookworms. And specifically, a guy named 50 Cent, Curtis, whatever his last name, 50 Cent, very successful guy. He read a book called The 48 Laws of Power, which is a diabolical book. And he uses it to just run circles around the entertainment industry in the world. And he's made himself very wealthy, despite how talented of a rapper he is and writer he is. Your kids need something. Excuse me. There's a statistic right now that says that 1 in every 20 kids graduating from high school in New York is prepared to just barely survive in college mathematically. That is a disaster. So I don't want to hear that you don't need this. That's ridiculous. This is sorely needed. And if the schools don't buy it, I suggest you as a parent buy it for your kids and tell people that this is out there, because this works. I read Malcolm X's autobiography, changed my life, stopped me in my tracks. 50 Cent read The 48 Laws of Power. He was so overwhelmed by that book that when he got out and became successful, the guy Robert Greene, 50 Cent wrote a book with him. These books speak to kids in the intimate, most quiet times of their life when nobody else is around, and speak to them in a way that you can't. And there are chapters in here about being in gangs, about being jumped, about going to jail. All these things are in there, interwoven with this money machine, corporate, high-level, entrepreneurial direction that the book goes in, that simplifies it and turns all of these kids into technologists without them knowing it. This is sorely needed. I urge you to take a look at it. I urge you to look into the chapters, read the audiobook, listen to it, and if you believe, which you will if you give it a chance, that it can help your kids, then I highly suggest, for the sake of your children and our people, that you read this book with your kids multiple times. God bless you. Have a good day. All right, so I don't want to take too long. We've already gotten 45 minutes sort of going into the book here. Again, it's called The Formula, The Money Machine, How to Supercharge Your Money Machine. We have an entire curriculum that goes with it, with lesson plans for an entire school year. You can use it as an after-school program. You can use it as an elective class, or you can use it as a summer like boot camp, entrepreneurial boot camp. It works really well in that context. There's an audiobook, there's an ebook, and then there's a soft cover book. Schools that buy this would get all three. And I hope I've explained why this is important for young people, young and old, anybody who's into entrepreneurship right now. Right now, we're in a mode of, they call it the Great Resignation, where people are just resigning from their jobs because they don't want to work anymore. So I think that this is a timely product for right now, for what's going on. I'm sure it can save lives if the schools start making it a summer reading or a required reading during the day for all those kids. I mean, I go into the schools and the kids are out of control. They have no clue that the kids are in the classes, and the math teachers can barely even keep them in the seats or punching each other in the face, much less teach them what a formula is. So this is sorely needed, and not to mention, the formula itself is one of the elements of the formula is money. What kid doesn't want to solve a formula for money? I just don't. I mean, sometimes when I talk to schools, and I feel like it's so obvious that there is money in this formula. It is a linear mathematical equation. It satisfies all of the mathematical criteria for passing the Regents or the next generation science teaching standards. It's all of those things. This is a real engineering pursuit, but it's presented in a way that your kids are not going to know it's engineering until they're so caught up in the fact that they want to be a billionaire rock star entrepreneur, that they don't want to be in a gang anymore, that they will do anything I tell them to. And that's what I want to really stress. Once you get them hooked on this and they get emotionally connected to the thought of being an entrepreneur, being in a gang is out the door. That's gone. All right, that's over. Violence and committing violence against one another, that's over, because the thought process here is that poor people inflict pain on each other. Wealthy people look for ways to cure pain for the world. And those are two different mindsets completely. And once your kids pick up on that, there's no fighting in the hallway, because in the library where people are processing information, it's quiet. Okay? So as far as the value of the book, I think I'm hoping that it's clear. My number is 516-902-9837. I would love to discuss this in detail. There are a lot of, I would love to discuss this with you, administrators and parents, in detail. Sometimes I feel like I just need to go direct to the parents and show this to them, because basically, in closing, I have the technology to rebuild all of them. Have a good day. God bless. Read this book in good health.